Hey Amarillo, I'm Skylar Gallup, and you are listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. We record every week at Amarillo College's Innovation Outpost. The IO supports education, workforce development, and industry growth by inspiring and facilitating innovation in the Texas Panhandle. Today's guest is Amanda Mathias. Amanda is the executive director of the Meadows Institute Panhandle and is doing deep and impactful work on the systems which impact Panhandle residents and their access to mental health services. We talk a lot about mental health in our area, of course, but also about Amanda's family's deep, and I mean deep, roots in this place, as well as what happens when your calling isn't what you thought it would be, and how impactful it can be when you answer it anyway. Here's Amanda. All right, Amanda Mathias, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Looking forward to it. So we start these conversations the same with each guest, and that's asking, how did you come to be here today? So what is sort of your origin story with this place that we call home?
Yeah, so I was raised here in the Texas Panhandle, and my family goes back 7 generations, have lived here. One of my great-grandfathers actually started one of the first businesses in Amarillo, which was a saddle shop. So I have deep roots here.
That's incredible. That if 7 generations is many generations of Texas Panhandleans.
Yes. And I always say, there's not a drop in my blood that doesn't run with the pioneer spirit. So I'm so proud to be from here and grow up here.
That's awesome. Schools, what schools did you go up through?
Yeah, so I grew up here until 8th grade, and I went, like Paramount Terrace and Austin Middle School.
Okay.
Middle of my 8th grade year, I moved to Canyon, Texas, where my dad's entire family is from. He graduated from Canyon High. My daughter will graduate from Canyon High. And so left there. After that, I went down to just a little bit down the road to Texas Tech University, and then came back here for a couple years and worked, and then went down to San Antonio, where I got my master's and my doctorate at St. Mary's University. And we stayed there for 15 years and then came back in 2018, however many years ago is that? Almost 7, I think.
A handful, yeah.
Yeah.
So, we love a comeback story. I think a lot of people that work in Amarillo work specifically to have your story recreated more often, and that's people coming back. So talk to me about that process. Why? I suspect 7 generations might have a little bit to do with the why.
Exactly. Well, definitely missing family.
Yeah.
But we were down there, and one of the things that happened when we were there, I always think about, is that we moved around in different neighborhoods in San Antonio. We actually were in Fredericksburg for a little bit. We were out in Bernie before we left. And what I realized was that I kept going to different areas thinking this will be home. Maybe this will be home. But it was because it was never home that I just sort of couldn't get settled. And so I remember, sitting out on a patio with absolutely no wind in Bernie, Texas, and talking to my husband and just having this gut feeling and telling him, I really just want to go home. And so we had sort of a crazy situation where he would have, recruiters calling him to go to different banks or whatever. And he said, no, I don't really want to go to a different bank around here. But if you happen to have anything in Amarillo, Texas, and the recruiter, couldn't believe that he was asking for that. And there happened to be a position that had opened up at First Bank Southwest. And so my husband, Matt Mathias, we came back very quickly after that. And he is the, president for First Bank Southwest in this area now. And, great group of people there. And we've just been so fortunate to come back in that way.
It's funny how those things happen.
Yes. Just, whether it was coincidence or, some people say God or whatever it was. I mean, it was a quickly answered prayer for me. I can say that for sure.
That's beautiful. What were your degrees from St. Mary's?
So my degree at St. Mary's is in marriage and family therapy, both my master's and my doctorate. And then I have a license in marriage and family therapy and then professional counselor. But the way I sort of got there is a strange, story. I had, from the time I was 4 years old here in Amarillo, I was really, really sick in the hospital. There was a doctor, a local pediatrician, Dr. Shu Shum, who practiced for many, many years here. And he literally saved my life. They could not figure out what was going on. And he, the story is that he stayed up all night looking at medical books because, of course, we didn't have the internet, and came across what the problem was and literally saved my life. In that treatment, he, and I remember his nurses as well, were so kind to me, and I would have to have like these blood transfusions every hour, and I would be so scared as a little girl because, things were very different than like literally you were having a needle in your arm every single, whatever. And he would say to me, your mommy loves you, your daddy loves you, and I love you. And whatever that was, that care, it just was so transformative for my little brain and the way I thought about how you treat people. And so from that time on, I, would tell my parents I want to be a doctor. I want to be like Dr. Shum. And so the plan was always to go to medical school. And I went to tech with that in mind. And I ended up hating pre-med classes. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to look around, just see what other things are out there. And I was able to get into the family studies program. And at the time, it was a minor, but it was the alcohol and addiction studies program. And through those programs, you're exposed to, like, you have to attend Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous to sort of see, what the process of recovery is and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And I remember sitting there and seeing these people stand up, whether it was day one of their sobriety or, however many years into it, and hearing these stories of just the abundance of things they had overcome. And I, am from this family where I was so loved and supported. My parents have been married 50-something years. I was lifted up and loved by my parents, my community, especially like our schools in Canyon and that community just really wrapped around me and supported me. Anything I wanted, there were people that helped me find a way to get that goal. And so to sit in a room and listen to these really difficult stories and know that these people were still standing and fighting was so unbelievably, it shook me and was inspiring in a way that I just wanted to be a part of that. And, people will have said to me throughout my career, there's just sort of this mentality of like, oh, or, this, like, you're wanting to be some kind of savior to somebody.
Okay.
And for me, that is absolutely not the case. I just wanted to like walk alongside them, because to watch people fight for their lives, whether it be through, mental health disorders or their addictions or both, it's inspiring. And to get to be a part of that is such an honor. And so anyway, all of that to say, that took me away from wanting to go to medical school. I got to come back here after I graduated and worked for a couple years at was then the Tyler Resource Center. It's now the Guyon Sanders, I think,
Sure.
Center, right?
Yeah.
And so I got to work with, our unhoused population and a lot of folks who were dealing with untreated mental illness and addiction and that sort of thing. And I just fell madly in love with that population. And it's just where I wanted to spend my life. And so decided to look at programs and ended up at St. Mary's University. And so while my degree, all that to say, is in marriage and family therapy, I did very little of that. And the majority of my career has been spent in community mental health. So.
Well, it sounds like you just got called into it.
I know that people feel, yes, I think that's true. I absolutely, without question, because it was the scariest thing in my life to say, I don't want to go to medical school. That was always the plan.
Sure.
This is the route I want to take. And there has never been anything more in my life that I am certain was the right decision, for sure.
There's a lot in sort of like community service work. There's a lot of that savior complex. And it presents like really notable challenges in the way that we work and the effectiveness of our work. And I think it's interesting and certainly probably has contributed to the success that you found in your career, is that it sounds like real early on, like maybe you didn't even have to learn not to have that savior complex, but you didn't have in the beginning, that you just, coming from this place of these populations being unfamiliar to you, just kind of like having this want to help and walk alongside. I think a lot of people do a lot of internal work to get there. And it sounds like you came to the table there.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that I was, very much raised by my parents. My mother, was a school teacher, and that rather than a savior mentality, it's a servant mentality. I ran a lot of programs, in the middle of my career and before I came to, the organization I'm with now. And I remember having some young clinicians who, and nothing wrong with this, maybe were a little bit more in that savior mentality, or, the irritation of why are people not showing up for their appointments or this or that, And so having to explain that you are here in this job because you are a servant to those people. Your job is to get them to the place they need to go, is to make sure that they're connected to resources that will change their life. And I think I was very fortunate to have, the opportunity to kind of have a lot of mentors that also felt that way, but then also to be able to mold young clinicians to that. And they did remarkable work. I mean, just phenomenal work with folks. And it's probably what I'm the most proud of in my career.
Yeah, it's a journey for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay, so take us back. Now you've gone home.
Yes.
Once you and Matt settled back up here with your deep-rooted family,
yes.
Then what did you get to work on?
So when I was at the very end of being in San Antonio, in my clinical work, I had helped create these programs that were historically folks were staying in for, decades. And sort of the mentality for a long time in the field was to kind of keep them in the boat, just like keep them stable, make sure that, they're not relapsing, that sort of thing. But I challenged that with my teams in why can't they have jobs and homes and, those sort of things. And so we really, at that time, there was some funding where you could be really innovative and creative. And so we were able to build these programs where you really wrapped around people with serious mental illness and addiction issues. And our folks, because of the way we set up the programs, were getting better in 18 months to 2 years, where they were staying in these programs for decades. And so they were getting housing, and they were keeping housing, and they were getting jobs and staying stable and reconnecting with families they hadn't seen in 20 years. And because of that work, I caught the attention of the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, which at that time had been pretty newly established. My now CEO, Dr. Andy Keller, had just become CEO. And they were doing an assessment in San Antonio where my work was. And he found interest in the way that I looked at things and the work that I did. And so he recruited me to come and sort of disseminate that throughout the state. And so that's how I ended up at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute. And I've been there since 2016 and have just grown professionally there. I always give the example of the difference in that work and the clinical work was when you're in clinical work, I imagine it, you kind of think about it like somebody in the trenches of a war. You're fighting what's right in front of you every day, and it is complete chaos constantly.
Yeah.
And so you're doing that, and you think the folks around you, your teams, are the hardest fighting, and you're the one without the most resources, all these sorts of things. And then when I was able to come into this work, the policy work, it was like getting on a helicopter and you go up and you see there are people fighting everywhere in the trenches. Oh. And the fights might be different and the resources may be different, but everybody is trying for the same goal, which is to create a better system, save lives, make things better. And so as much as I miss the patient population, I realized that I could be so much more helpful in a policy setting than, the one-on-one sort of situation. And so I've been really, really fortunate to do that work. When we came back, the Institute had been present in our community for a while, since about 2016, but not in a way that was really sort of moving the system. It was really programmatically focused. And so in about 2023, I decided to transition roles. I left as the Senior Vice President of Clinical Policy and Innovation and try to focus on really our community and our needs. And so we started talking to funder groups about what would it be like to establish a regionally focused team. And what that would mean for us is that we were focusing on our local policy needs and our programmatic needs. And our resource needs here in the Texas Panhandle for, our mental health system, because what I've always said is that what works in Houston's not going to work in Amarillo. What works
Yep.
in El Paso is never going to make it off the ground in Dallas. And so everything that happens locally really needs to be informed by the local systems. And so we established 1 year ago, because it took a long time talking to our funders, the Meadows Institute Panhandle. And so now I serve as the executive director of that here.
What are the answers to those questions? What does our area need? What's going to work in our area to help support some of those populations that you have found?
Well, so one of the really exciting things, one of the main things that came out of our first year work was a very extensive data analysis.
Okay.
And to date, it's the most extensive that's come out of the Institute because I just kept asking questions. So I would get data to review and then go, well, why this? Well, what about that? Well, as an example, there was something in the data that was saying we were treating a lower level of people in poverty than throughout the state of Texas. Well, then we asked the question, well, where are those places? So what we found out was, of course, there's a lot in the outlying smaller rural areas. And so our transportation to the sort of, center of where our care is, which is here, in Potter County, is difficult. That's a huge barrier. So we have to look at things like that. Okay, we know that those folks aren't getting here. What are our answers? How do we start innovating, whether that means to bring the services out to them, or in telehealth, or, everybody talks about how important broadband is, making sure folks have access to those things. And so the data really started showing the trends, and some of those things, like you said, I wasn't expecting. So one thing is, we know that 80% of our population with any sort of mental health disorder, whether it be adult or child, could be treated in a primary care pediatric setting. And that is a very, very hopeful number.
Yeah, 80%. That's huge.
And so that tells me, okay, we really need to start looking at how do we bolster up our primary care physicians to have the support they need to carry out, the treatment for those mild to moderate conditions within that setting, because that opens up access then for the more severe folks to have, connection with psychiatrists and that sort of thing.
Right.
Because right now people are waiting, 6 months to see a psychiatrist thinking, oh, I'm feeling a little down. Well, that could easily be treated in your primary care setting. And so we've helped integrate what's called the collaborative care model in some of our systems through funding through the Amarillo Area Foundation. And so starting that and now looking at, okay, we have the numbers that show that we're on the right track. How do we continue to expand that kind of programming? One of the main focuses has to be on workforce. I can't off the top of my head remember, I think it's like 50% of what, the rest of the state has in way of behavioral health physicians, we don't have. And so I've talked a lot to the folks at Texas Tech Health Science Center and West Texas A&M University. We want to talk to AC and our local ISDs about how do we start growing those pipelines here, because there's such a need for growing our own. I mean, because like we've said, a lot of folks, you're from here, you come back here, that sort of thing. And so there usually is a connection to our community. So how do we start exposing kids younger to that? Because, like you said about the calling, that I think you either have it in you or you don't. It's really, really hard emotional work, but it also, if it's in you, it is the greatest gift to be able to find that work. And so how do we start exposing kids? So I think the two main things are really, trying to figure out how do we expand the wraparound for our primary care physicians, as well as building that workforce and integrating that into our curriculums and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important to recognize the unique needs in our area that, if that primary care physician in, Pampa or Laz Buddy, if they don't have the resources, that kid or that adult may not have also the resources to drive to Amarillo where they are.
Right, exactly. So there are definitely, those barriers that we have to think about that have nothing to do with the disorder, right? And so how do we become creative about that? And one of the things that was my personal biggest goal for the Meadows Institute Panhandle was that we become sort of an innovation hub for rural mental health. It's a hot topic at the federal level, at the state level. And so the Institute is made up of, and I mean this completely, the most genius people in the United States. I'm not one of them, but my colleagues are just these brilliant, brilliant minds who together, we kind of come together and think through what are the possibilities. And so it's really cool to be able to create just based on need, not, to say, okay, we're, like you said, Pampa is different than Borger, is different than Childress. And how do we make sure that we're tailoring all of the things that we create to the people that are in those communities? Historically, especially in the Panhandle, it's been kind of a information down. So they make the decision, or up, I guess in this case, but information, they make the decisions at the legislature, and it's usually about urban settings. And so we are told sort of what is available to do rather than us informing our unique needs. And I think that that's what the Meadows Institute Panhandle will definitely be helpful in, is creating rural innovation and hopefully being able to disseminate that through not only rural Texas, but, the United States. And the Institute has that ability, so.
And I think that there is some momentum right now. As you mentioned, it's kind of a hot button issue. You guys just completed your first year.
Yeah.
We've got the new mental health hospital, which was years in the making and just broke ground, I think, a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Last week.
Was it? Or 2 weeks? Anyway,
I think so, but very, very recently. Recognizing, however, that change, certainly of the systemic level, takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. What are you hopeful for around rural mental health care in the Panhandle?
So I thank you for saying that. That is the exact thing that needs to be understood, is there's all this energy around it, which is so exciting, and there is a momentum. But the reality, and I've watched this obviously throughout my career in every community in Texas and also, parts of the nation, it takes a long time to build those systems. So I think we, are so lucky to have champions like, Judge Nancy Tanner, who really literally raised her hand and started the conversation around the state hospital and the need for that. We have, Laura Street helped establish the Panhandle Behavioral Health Alliance, which they really, really started the conversation community-wide about what mental health was and the parts of the system. And so my hope is, one, that folks understand that there is a need to continue the momentum and the support for building that system, but it does take a long time. I've been really fortunate. We created, out of the Meadows Institute Panhandle, an advisory council, which is made up of the leadership of the local mental health authority, which is Texas Panhandle Centers, Northwest Texas Hospital, Oceans Behavioral Hospital, BSA, and bringing those leaders together just as a starting and saying, here's the data. Does this make sense to you? And as we move forward and start making decisions about bringing in programming, bringing in resources, are you willing to partner in a way that starts building that system? And they are. And that's the thing that's so incredible about our community and that I was nervous about. I mean, this is a little bit of a next step, and are people willing to take it? And those leaders are so unbelievably supportive and excited. They see the need, and they have really just sort of stepped up in a way of supporting us in thinking about how we built that system. So I think that's my hope, is that there's a patience for how hard that is to do, but also an excitement and an understanding and continued support for that work and making sure that we get there in the next, 10 years or whatever it is.
I think, answering my own question as well, hearing you describe the process of getting the people at the table to start the conversation, to move to collaboration, to hopefully move to systemic change, I feel like is maybe not a new idea, but like a new action in town, within the mental health community, but I think also across different areas of interest in our community, that I think people have identified that our community was siloed for a bit, perhaps maybe because it was like the front lines on the ground. You think that you're the one fighting the hardest fights, that you're the one, with the most difficult resource challenges. And so you're just in your day-to-day work. But, even in the time that I've been doing some kind of community work, I think that our leaders, those people that interface with these issues, have all kind of started saying, let's all do this together, maybe a little bit more meaningfully. Yeah. And I think that's a really hopeful change.
Yeah.
or hope bringing change that I've seen.
I agree. And I think that what's interesting to me is that it hasn't just happened in the provider community. Our philanthropists, our largest funders, everybody has sort of seen, even if it just took a conversation, you know, so I'll say this, I'll backtrack a little bit. When we were first trying to start the Meadows Institute Panhandle, you know, there was a feeling of, well, I don't know if that affects the population that I serve. And so to start having conversations about mental health affects every single part
every
of
single
healthcare,
one. Yeah.
every part of education, every part of workforce, every part of, I mean, you know, in talking with the range the other day, somebody, you know, one of the folks from there, we were talking about how it affects the ranchers and our ag producers, that sort of thing. And so it has been so hopeful to see, exactly like you said, this acceptance and understanding that it, you know, it exists. And my biggest thing is, I feel like for years there was this, which I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but there was this very much mantra like, you know, anti-stigma and yada yada. And I'm so sick of that, because people were talking about it like it was an otherness, and it isn't an otherness. It's healthcare. Your brain is in your body. Therefore, when you are treating mental health, you are treating physical health because your brain is in your body. And I think that we are definitely starting to see a shift towards that. And I appreciate very much the acceptance of that, you know, to see people start talking about it in that way. And definitely the integration of it into primary care is a huge thing, because that's where you're receiving your health care anyway. That's where you go get treated for a common cold, a cough, diabetes, whatever it is. So I think to put a lot of emphasis and support and bolstering that will definitely help folks move to the mindset of, you know, mental health care is just the same as physical health care.
Yeah. And that you don't have to go to a psychiatrist.
Yes, exactly.
Go talk to your doctor.
Exactly.
Go tell your doctor you're sad.
Yes.
Or things are hard.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some of the kind of things that are setting us up for success. What are some challenges that you guys run into?
I would say it's this double-edged sword, right? It's the same things. We're continuing to need to have conversations. Resources are always an issue. We were really, really lucky, just to kind of give a little bit of a backstory of how our relationship with the Amarillo Area Foundation started. Was at the time, the Meadows Institute had been granted what's called the Lone Star Prize, and it was this, you know, very innovative, big grant. And so what we were doing was trying to integrate collaborative care across the state of Texas in health systems. Well, there was kind of like, as there always is for the Panhandle, a line, right? Like, first we're going to do this in, I can't remember where it was, but I'm just going to say, first we're going to do this in Dallas, then we're going to do this in Houston, we're going to, you know, whatever. And so Clay Stripling at the time, bless his heart, was, you know, really interested in how do we start integrating mental health care, rural especially. And so he reached out to the Institute and started having conversation about that. And we said, oh, you know, well, hopefully we'll get you to number 6 in the line as we roll this out. And he said, no, I'm not waiting for you to come to me. What if I can, you know, put together local funding so that we can just do it here and you can help support us? And so we did. And he really, it's going to make me tear up, but I think that is the mentality of the community, right? Like, no, I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to come help us. We can save ourselves. Thank you very much, you know? And so he really did. And he invested in that. And so we were able to start that integration with family medicine clinics, and then with BSA and Moore County Hospital District.
It continues to amaze me how often that part of the Panhandle spirit of I'm not going to wait.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and get it done here.
Yeah.
And then, like, that's step one, right? And then we go ahead and get it done here. Exactly. And I think we see continually the willingness for people in the Panhandle to say, we will get the funders, we will get the data, we will get the solutions, and we'll work really, really hard to do our best to implement this change.
Exactly.
And I think it's beautiful. One of my favorite things about the Panhandle is how often we continually see that happen.
Yes. And that's exactly what happened for us with the funders that we have. I kind of teased that I thought it was going to be one conversation, slam dunk, they're going to fund this today. And what I found was they are the most thoughtful amazing stewards of the resources that they have. So it was a long conversation. It was,
Speaking
year.
of the Amarillo Area Foundation.
Well, and Bivens and the Harrington Cancer and Health Foundation and High Plains Christian Ministries, all 4 of those funders, they gave us a run for our money. And I tell you, I had to talk and talk and talk. And one of the things that's funny is coming back to the Panhandle, a lot of folks who I grew up with here in Amarillo sit on those boards, and my husband's boss sits on the board, and one of his colleagues sits on a different board. And so having to really stand up and say, this is the value, this is what I promise you, and them being so thoughtful about that, and the fact that they trust us enough to invest their resources in this is, just what is so hopeful to me for where we have to go, because we do have folks behind us and know, and believe and trust in us. And I will do everything in my power to be worthy of that.
So we've talked some about kind of like that first level preventative or first level of like intervention in mental health challenges being at your primary care provider. The other side of that is some very, very difficult, very serious mental health challenges that also are to be addressed in our population. And so I want to talk about where y'all's work intersects with or walks alongside our unhoused population, which is, a critical challenge in Amarillo and the Panhandle, we know. And there's some really good work being done. But how does the Meadows Institute Panhandle approach supporting our unhoused population?
So, the very beginning of the Institute, a lot of our work was focused around folks with serious mental illness. That's obviously, like I've talked about, where my career was, that's what my career was in. And so that really comes through the work of our local mental health authorities. Texas Panhandle Center does remarkable work. We have been partners with them for many, many years. They continue to, for better or worse, we work together to really sort of advise them on what to go after in way of funding so that they can set up programming and expand access. They do a really good job of going out and trying to support and wrap around those folks. I think that, Northwest Texas Health System, their behavioral health hospital there, Chris Fial, who's the CEO, he is so vested in helping people get better. Oceans Hospital, not too long ago, probably a year or two ago, expanded their age of admissions that could come in so that they could really sort of bring those people in. And I mean, our first responders are remarkable. We have, specially trained officers that go out and respond in situations for folks like that. And so I think, and TPC is developing a diversion center now so that instead of going straight to an ER or goodness, God forbid, jail, they're coming to them. And there's, so I think that the way that we at the Institute support that specific population is to support our different systems, whether it be first responders or our local mental health authority or our hospitals, in having access to the most evidence-based practices, making sure that we're connecting them to the resources that are available so that they can have these multi-sector partnerships, and then continuing to really sort of advise on the processes and the way we set those up. So for instance, you talked about the state hospital. Judge Tanner raised her hand and said, we need a state hospital. And then we were, invited by Texas Panhandle Centers and the hospital systems and the judge to come in and really help them create that proposal that went to the state and was accepted. One of the things that we will make sure to continue to do is when the state hospital comes, it's going to be really important that they are connected to all these sectors of our system, because folks have to be able to flow in and out and get to care that they need. And if we just treat it like here's a state hospital and the person gets out and let's hope to goodness he finds the appointment, we hand him a piece of paper, that's just not going to work. And so we will be very much a part of setting up those processes and making sure that folks are wrapped around as they go in and come out.
Wraparound services. For sure. So what is your vision for the next, let's say, 5 years?
So I hope my main focus really truly is building partnerships with WT, Texas Tech Health Science Center, AC, our ISDs, and starting to create that workforce. It is an honest concern. It is honestly a concern for our providers. whether it be the hospitals or the local mental health authority, our clinics, the state hospital. So it is absolutely imperative that we establish that and start growing our own, as I said. And then also really trying to find a way to leverage, local funding, state funding, whatever it needs to be in order to expand our collaborative care, especially out in our rural areas. And then also looking at, I hope that we're able to start establishing programming out in the rural areas. We already have some. TPC is present in places. There's a new place that's being developed in Borger. And so just establishing things that are in the community so folks are able to get to that treatment, because transportation is such a barrier out here. Yeah. So I think in 5 years, my main goals are, we are on the road to establishing programming, or have already established within, our education systems. And then of course, just creating access in different points in our community.
Yeah. I think working in mental health, the risk is high.
Yeah.
Of if we're not doing this work correctly.
Absolutely. I hate to, bring this up, but our suicide rates are higher than anywhere else, in the state of Texas. We have 19.3, people per 100,000 in the Panhandle, compared to 14.5, in Texas. And so, there is definitely an issue. Our highest, disorder is in depression. So we know there are trends that have to be dealt with. And I think that, I keep going back to the primary care, the earlier we intervene, just like with any other disease, that we, identify it, treat it, the quicker and the better the recovery is. So I think if we just continue to sort of focus on that early identification, no matter where it is, if they're in a school or a faith home or, our friends, our family, primary care, wherever it may be, the earlier we identify it and treat it, the better off we're going to be.
If you're starting or growing a small business and need some cash, let me tell you about Amarillo Venture Capital. They are a Hey Amarillo sponsor. They're locally owned, and what makes them different is they don't just invest in businesses, they invest in people. So whether you need $5,000 or $50,000, they offer flexible, asset-based loans, often with funding in a week or less. And it's not just the money. They can connect you with their local network of legal, accounting, and business resources to help you succeed. Check them out at amarilloventurecapital.com. All right, I'm back with Amanda Mathias. Amanda, this is the part of the show that we call 8 Straight. So I'm going to ask you 8 questions. You can answer them with as much or as little detail as you want, and in any way that you want to. Okay. You ready?
I think so, yes.
Okay. First off, what is your favorite local restaurant?
Okay, so I told you I was a Canyon girl. So I'm going to say in Amarillo, my favorite is Hummers. I grew up in that restaurant. I love it so much. And then in Canyon, I would say Mickey's Place, which is on the square there. The owners, Mickey and Renee Foster, are just like the greatest people. They have fantastic staff, and the food's really, really good. So
wonderful. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
Well, obviously, I think every single person is going to say construction on the highways, but so I'm not saying there's too many. I don't need people flipping out that I'm like attacking businesses or anything, but I have observed we have a lot of gas stations. Like there's a lot of gas stations, and I don't know what that's about, but yeah. I'm not saying there's too many. I'm just observing that there's an awful lot of them.
Just an observation.
Just putting it out there.
On every single corner.
There are some very devoted people to some of those
Sometimes 2 corners in an intersection. We're just observing.
I'm just saying what I see. I'm just calling them how I see.
That's right. Okay, so what does this area not have enough of?
We do not have enough of people turning off their phones on the highway. Like I tell you, every time somebody like swipes or goes across a line or is going, 20 miles an hour in a 75, it's like a 16-year-old girl texting, looking directly at her screen.
I know. And then you pull up beside him.
Yeah. And
I am in no way prone to road rage. That's just like not my space. However, when that happens to me, and you've got this car that has done something unsafe, and then you pull up beside them at the stoplight and they're just click, click, click.
Yeah.
That is the time I will wave like a crazy person.
Exactly.
Because I'm like, listen, I've got my kids in my car.
I know. And I have a daughter who will drive, I guess, in a year from now, and it terrifies me. So
I'm with you on that one. What's your favorite local neighborhood, Amanda?
Well, it's Canyon Country Club. That's where I grew up. That's where I live. And I know it's not Amarillo, but that is my favorite neighborhood. It is like the greatest place in the world.
Fair. How do you describe Amarillo to people not from here?
Well, I often say it's not just what's off I-40, because most people are like, oh, I've driven there. Isn't that where that big steak is? But I do explain that we have the finest people on the planet in this community. There's nobody kinder, more giving, more welcoming. I have colleagues that fly in all the time to do work here, and every one of them will say, these are the nicest people I've ever met. And I think that's the way that I describe. I mean, there's just nobody better than the people up here.
Yep. We say it all the time, and it's because it's true.
Yeah, it is true. We're the best. I mean, I can't help that.
Sorry. What is the most underrated aspect of living here?
Oh, the slowness.
Ooh.
So, like I said, we were down in
San
South
Antonio,
Texas,
yeah,
for 15 years. And there's just everything is urgent and irritation and, no patience and especially driving and traffic and all that. And I think the way that people move and take time to talk to each other and just the way of life is slow. And I am so unbelievably grateful for that.
I really like that answer. I agree with that, the slowness.
And the way we talk is pretty slow too.
That as well, yeah. So you talked about off of I-40. When was the last time you visited the Big Texan for that big old steak?
Good Lord. I mean, that's got to have been, I was probably 10 years old.
Really?
Yeah. I have not been out there in forever.
Yeah.
Ever. Yeah.
You haven't done the challenge?
No, my gosh. Oh, no.
No, not for you.
No,
it's not for me either.
Not for me.
So finally, what do you hope for Amarillo in 10 years?
You know what? I love this place. And like I said, having come back, I love it even more. And so there's not a lot that I would change, honestly. But I do hope that there continues to be the beautification of our downtown. Yeah. I love our downtown.
Yeah.
I think Beth Duke at Center City, she has done remarkable work with her her board and the people that work there, and the Hoodoo Art Foundation with the murals. I mean, I love it, and I hope to and the Barfield. I love the Barfield. But I hope to see, more and more life brought into that. I hope that there's more living spaces and restaurants and shops and things. I just think we have such a cool area down here. I think that would be the one thing that I wanted to see sort of grow and be different.
Yeah, keep that going. Very cool. Okay, that concludes the 8 straight questions. We like to end by asking our guests to endorse something. So what is something, anything at all, that you would like to endorse in or about our area?
Well, I have the great honor of sitting on the Panhandle Plains Historical Society. And so I would want to endorse the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. Right now we are not currently open. The building is not currently open, but that staff, the folks that run the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum are the most devoted, mission-driven people I've ever met in my life. And they have, even with this sort of issue of space, found a way to innovate and be creative and make sure that the museum is out in the community continuing to tell the story, because that museum is the story of us. And so I think that, just please continue to support that museum. Please show up to, the events, because they are working so hard to continue to bring them to us. I think next Friday is June 20th. And there's, like movies on the lawn this summer. And then there's, all sorts of things that they have really found a way to bring, our story and the artifacts and all of that and keep it alive. I am so grateful to that staff. And so I just hope that we can all continue to endorse it and support it.
I was so impressed. Last week, I went to the 1-year anniversary of the Amarillo Tribune, and it was over at Arts in the Sunset, and the Panhandle Plains Museum had a pop-up. Yeah. And it was, like the really cool panels about the history of Buffalo and the Goodnight Ranch, and as you said, our shared history. Yeah. And I was talking to the 2 staff members, and I just said, I hope that you're hearing this a lot right now, but like you are so supported and you are so valued. And, I was trying to express support, and she like turned around and quipped, and she was like, you know what, this has been such a really cool experience for our staff to find ways to be out in our community and actually get outside of our building and come to pop-ups like this. And so I was so heartened and impressed by the resiliency and the innovation that we've seen. I think there could have been an opportunity for it to be the end.
Yeah.
And just even hearing from that one-off staff member who was just like demonstrating a buffalo bladder.
Exactly.
And saying like, no, this has been a great opportunity to get out into spaces and, areas of the community that they hadn't previously.
Yes. And it, what's happening is emotional.
It's a hard time.
Because so many of us have grown up. I grew up in the halls of that place. And I think that the staff and the way that they have had just this hope and positivity shifted how I was, sort of feeling to like, what are we worried about? Like, we're going to be okay, and we are going to be okay. And I think that the way to do that is just to continue to support them and the museum. And we are all figuring out a path, and, we don't have the answers right now, but we will. And just like everything in the Texas Panhandle, we'll come together, we'll make it work. And, again, I'm just grateful to that staff and to everybody who continues to support it.
Yeah, through grit and innovation and resiliency, right?
Amen.
That's what we do. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Does your marketing feel like a shot in the dark? Are your social media posts getting lost in the scroll? Unlock your business's potential with SKP Creative. They know your audience and design posts that reflect your brand and drive real engagement. From scroll-stopping social media content to powerful traditional marketing, graphic design, and website development, SKP Creative covers it all. Are you ready to elevate your feed and turn your marketing into a success story? Visit skpcreative.com today. And that concludes this episode. Thanks to Amanda Mathias for the interview. Thanks to SKP Creative and Amarillo Venture Capital for supporting this podcast. And to Angelina Marie for editing every week. Executive directors on this episode are Jim and Barbara Witten. If your business is interested in supporting the podcast, visit heyamarillo.com. Thanks for listening. This has been episode 404 of Hey Amarillo. My name is Skylar Gallup, and we'll see you next week.